Welcome to this first episode of Smart Coffee Break, the productivity podcast brought to you by Nestlé Coffee Partners. In this podcast, I want to look at the history and origins of office productivity, how its parameters have changed in recent years, and what will be the effects of the global pandemic. To help me introduce the world of productivity is my special guest, Despina Katsikakis, architect, consultant, and today global head of Total Workplace at Cushman and Wakefield. Despina, welcome. So how do you think business attitudes to office productivity have changed since the 1980s?
In the 80s and 90s, we focused on mapping the relationship between technology, work process, and place to look at how the intersection of these three could support people to do their best work and to be productive. We started mapping two critical dimensions of work process: the degree and importance of face-to-face interaction that's necessary to carry out your work, and the level of autonomy, the degree of choice. So using this framework, we coined the term new ways of working, which really meant that mobile technology reduced the need for synchronous work and co-location of employees. So if we think about productivity and we think about the conventional office as factory Taylorist idea of the 19th century, that was based on the assumption of very little face-to-face interaction and even less autonomy. So individuals were co-located and directed to undertake specific tasks synchronously. We expected in the 90s already that the future office would actually rely on highly motivated individuals that were enabled by mobile technology and enjoyed a high degree of autonomy, but they would still need face-to-face interaction to really increase the richness of their transaction. So the implications we looked at for workplaces would be that the workplaces would be designed much more to support knowledge transfer, connectivity, rather than linear processes. So really a focus on community, culture, and knowledge. And the office would go from being a single location to a network of locations and available and adaptable spaces across physical and virtual spaces. Now, of course, when I think about that, the current post-pandemic office debate.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds very current. I mean, you had the whole picture in the frame in the 90s, and this sounds like the post-COVID office that we're entering today.
Exactly. But to your question of changing business attitudes, there is a significant difference. And that difference is that over the past 20 years, if I look backwards in the 90s, only enlightened business leaders understood those concepts and really began to implement them. So we can count the offices that use those concepts really in one or two hands. Today, particularly over the last 18 months, leaders have experienced firsthand their own and their employees' ability to maintain productivity while working remotely. And at the same time, they have a greater awareness of some of the underlying risks. So kind of just to bring it to life, we've been collecting extensive data over the last year with our experience per square foot survey. We now have over 125 participants worldwide. Our survey demonstrates that while productivity metrics, the let's say traditional metrics, have actually remained surprisingly stable, connection to colleagues, to culture, knowledge sharing and mentoring, and well-being have suffered significantly. And also younger generations are struggling the most. So these challenges, which are significant productivity underliers, are also the main risks for retention and engagement of talent. So I think we're seeing this new impact on organizations, that the realization of the importance of place and the office.
The autonomy side of your model has been holding up quite well during the pandemic. It's the interaction side of the model that has been struggling. And therefore,
exactly,
as we look at the future of the office, it has to be a social place of interaction and connectivity.
In the 2006 BCO report on the impact of office design on business performance, which actually continues to be highly relevant today, we focused on the fact that corporate real estate and facility management are often cut off from the wider and more important strategic business considerations, as they tend to be rewarded primarily and often exclusively on cost cutting. And consequently, it was very important to set the contributions that office design can make to business performance in a broader set of considerations. The first was the 3 E's of moving from efficiency, just cost focused, to effectiveness, which is really about people, and expression. And we looked at how those could be aligned with a second framework of office design variables in a structured way. It's important to note that many of these trends have now, in a post-pandemic environment, become basic expectations and considerations. So well-being and renew were always the lowest scores pre-pandemic. Now, looking at it today, suddenly we have general awareness that buildings are at the heart of the solution to well-being, because inevitably we spend 90% of our time indoors. And the pandemic has led us to look at public health through the lens of buildings. Now, layering that with the fact that we've become air quality experts in the last few months, and a greater awareness that nature nurtures, and incorporating elements of nature in buildings is essential to us as human beings. So quality of air, natural light, natural colors and patterns, sensory and acoustic controls, environmental factors are absolutely critical to our performance, as are operational policies that provide flexibility and choice, variety of work settings to allow us to move throughout the day, amenities and services to help us feel inspired and to connect with others. So all of those elements, which have been trends for decades, suddenly are at the heart of what organizations are looking to adapt and focus on.
So you talk about amenities and services. There's quite a theory that's very current around workplace attractors. So you place things in the environment to move people through a space, to curate and to orchestrate flows of people, water coolers, coffee points, open kitchens, and so on. How much do you think that's going to influence productivity?
It's important to identify what is it that will make the most impact within an organization. So we measure over 40 attributes that impact experience and productivity in order to identify the 4 or 5 attributes that really matter to invest in. If the key attributes are not performing, adding in soft, curated activities is not going to solve the productivity issue, which is why you need a considered and intentional approach. and the ability to identify what are the critical factors for your organization to invest in.
A lot of people are talking about what they missed during the pandemic. And one of those was the serendipitous encounter, the random interaction that you get in the workplace that you don't get when you're sitting at home with Zoom calls. Do you think that the random interaction is going to play a big part in ramping up productivity when we get back to the office?
This is a very important point, Jeremy, and serendipitous encounters tend to be at the heart of innovation, of meaningful connections with others, and network building, of course. Organizations will need to adapt how people will work differently to align the space to those new behaviors and to focus on creating dynamic ways to reinforce those elements of serendipity, of occasion, of memorable and delightful experiences, which are all the things that make us excited about coming back to the office.
A lot of people in the Worktech network are talking about productivity, not so much about individual output, but very much about a team concept. Would you agree that the future of productivity is about teams rather than individuals?
I think it's about both. And I think it's very interesting because as an industry, we love looking at binary dimensions. The debate about, are we in the office or remote? Is it about the individual or is it about the team? Rages on and on. And I think what's really interesting is as we look to the future, it's about both. It's about more remote and more in the office. It's about more focus on individuals and more focus on teams. So the ability to embrace greater complexity is what will create and ensure successful outcomes, because the future workplace for me is all about inspiring and engaging people. And the more you do that, the more you need to embrace that complexity.
And how would you describe or define productivity today in the light of your experiences and all the research you've done over many years? Do you have a nutshell definition for productivity now?
I don't think it's one nutshell definition. I mentioned the various attributes that I believe contribute to productivity. I do think those attributes that certainly we look at make sure that we acknowledge and understand the component parts that make up productivity, but inevitably, whilst you might be able to solve some of those with office design and with policy, a lot of factors around productivity are around management behavior, the ability to motivate and inspire people at work. So I come back to the fact that we need to look at ways of measuring attributes of productivity, but acknowledge the change journey and the impact that behavior will have on bringing it to life.
Despina Katsikakis of Cushman and Wakefield, it's been a great privilege to talk to you, to unravel the puzzle of productivity. We've talked about the relationship between a worker's autonomy and their interaction. And I think we've concluded that the office building is absolutely vital to the future of productivity. And we've acknowledged the social aspects of work, of people coming together. In the next podcast, we're going to be talking further about productivity. We're going to be talking about concentration and flow. Despina, thank you very much indeed.
For more information on how coffee can help productivity in your workplace, contact Nestlé Coffee Partners or visit our Smart Coffee Hub on the link provided to download the playbook.